welcome to The Explainer. Now, you've probably heard of the Doomsday Clock, right? That scientific warning about how close we are to catastrophe. But what if it's more than that? What if it's actually a symptom of a much deeper spiritual problem? A destructive cycle we've been stuck in for millennia. Today, we're going to dig into a source that argues just that.
So in early 2023, the Doomsday Clock was set to this, 90 seconds to midnight. Just think about that for a second. 90 seconds. That is the closest humanity has ever been to what they call a global catastrophe.
And look, this isn't some fringe idea we're talking about. The clock was created way back in 1945 by the very scientists behind the first atomic weapons. You know, guys like Einstein and Oppenheimer. They knew exactly what they were unleashing. So they picked this really powerful, stark imagery, an apocalypse, a final countdown, to try and warn us all about a catastrophe that's entirely of our own making.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, what that clock really symbolizes. Then, why we seem to be stuck in this loop of destruction. We'll also look at how nature builds things versus how we do it. And finally, we'll explore this idea of a spiritual path that could, just maybe, help us break free.
Okay, let's dive right in. And you gotta ask yourself, why are scientists, of all people, using language that sounds, well, pretty spiritual? You know, apocalypse, doomsday, to talk about a scientific problem?
Well, the source we're looking at says it's because the root cause is exactly the same. It doesn't matter if you're talking about nuclear war, climate collapse, or even prophecies from thousands of years ago. It all comes down to the same stuff. Our total disregard for the planet and, honestly, our inhumanity to each other. They're just two sides of the very same, very destructive coin.
And here's the kicker. This is not a new problem. Not even close. These kinds of doomsday clock scenarios, they've been haunting us for millennia. The only thing that's really changed is that we keep getting better and better at inventing more efficient ways to bring about our own end.
Yeah, this isn't some 21st century revelation. You can go all the way back to thinkers like Plato, or even the ancient prophets who came before him. They all pointed to the exact same thing as the cause of collapse, our own inner attitudes and the unsustainable ways we choose to live.
So when you look at it like this, the big takeaway is pretty stark, right? Our tech has changed beyond recognition. We went from spears to nuclear bombs. But the fundamental human behavior that keeps pushing us to the edge, that hasn't changed one bit. We've just gotten way more efficient at causing our own problems.
Okay, so you might be thinking, hold on, aren't cycles of creation and destruction just natural? And yeah, you'd be right. But, and this is a huge but, there's a massive difference between nature's cycles and the ones we humans keep creating.
To really get this difference, we have to talk about a key idea from our source, upbuilding. It's a simple but powerful concept. Don't just think of it as building stuff. Think of it as constructive growth that makes the entire system stronger, not just one little piece of it.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Look at nature's cycles. A forest fire, right? It seems destructive, but it clears the way for new life. The seasons create abundance for everything and everyone. Nature's cycles are, in a way, selfless. They strengthen the whole ecosystem. But then you look at our cycles, so often driven by selfish, narrow goals. They're the total opposite. They're, as the source puts it, antagonistic to upbuilding, which is why they just lead us back to square one, or worse, every single time.
So all of this brings us to a major crossroads, a really fundamental choice. And it's not just about what happens to us. It's about what kind of future we're going to actively choose to build.
So, what's it going to be? Do we just build our bunkers, stock up on supplies, and hope we're the lucky ones who survive the collapse? Or is there a way to actually break this vicious cycle for good? This is the point where we have to look past simple survival and start thinking about a much, much deeper kind of change.
And this is where the source makes a really fascinating distinction. It separates a scientific doomsday from a spiritual apocalypse. See, in a scientific doomsday, say a nuclear war, the survivors would probably just pick up the pieces and start the same broken cycle all over again. But a spiritual apocalypse, that's presented as something totally different, a complete and total reset of human consciousness. So, this so-called spiritual apocalypse isn't just about things ending. It's actually framed as a process of renewal. The collapse itself becomes the catalyst. It's a kind of purification, where only the people who are truly committed to that idea of upbuilding get to move forward. And they do it, guided by a whole new set of knowledge and principles for living. But here's the key. This purification isn't some magical force from the outside doing it to us. It's a voluntary decision. It's an internal, conscious choice to finally let go of that self-centered ego that has been at the root of all our problems. So in this scenario, survival isn't just physical, it's spiritual.
Okay, so what does any of this mean for us right here, right now, with that clock ticking down? Well, after diagnosing the problem, the source also lays out a potential path forward.
And it really boils down to this: individual accountability. I mean, it's so easy to just point fingers and blame our leaders, right? But our source calls that a delusion. The hard truth is, if we benefit from systems that cause harm, then we're part of the problem. And doing this inner work, that's not some fluffy utopian dream. It's presented as the only realistic way to actually break the cycle.
So the natural question is, where do you even begin? Well, the very first step, according to this, is making a conscious choice to get informed, to actually go out and seek the knowledge that can teach us a new way to live, a way that's based on upbuilding, not on constant disintegration. And so, in the end, we're left with a really provocative question. We live in a world that is obsessed with external threats and finding the next big technological fix. But this source suggests that maybe, just maybe, the key to stopping all of this isn't out there at all. Maybe it's right here, inside each and every one of us. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the most important countdown not the one on the Doomsday Clock, but the one happening within ourselves?